Y'all, I just spent 40 minutes, well, 30 minutes talking into this camera and going through this whole lesson only to realize that I hadn't hit the record button. So, we're going to start again, I guess. That feels good. Feels good. How's it going? Welcome to week 5 of the second 9 weeks. Um, I'll be honest with you, starting in the morning here, I don't know if we're going to be on A Day or B Day because I don't know if we ended on A Day or B Day last week. After the day off in the middle of the week last week for election day, the AB calendar for the district that they put out at the beginning of the year, and then Infinite Campus didn't match anymore. So I don't know if it's going to be A Day or B Day or not. So I'm going to have this up, and then whichever day it is, we'll find out. The plan is, though, is that on Thursday and Friday this week, which is the 12th and the 13th, we're going to do a live class session. I'll be online all day. So we'll do a live class on the 12th or the 13th, whichever one of those is the day that we're supposed to meet. We'll figure that out as we go on. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Ocean at the End of the Lane before you start reading chapters 6 through 11, which is what you're going to do this week. You're going to read chapters 6 through 11 this week. I wanted to talk a bit about the prologue through chapter 5 because chapter 5 gets us up to the beginning of the conflict. It gets us to the flapping creature and then the worm, but things haven't really begun to come to a head yet. It's really the beginning of the hill up, and it's a great point to kind of stop and reflect before we really ratchet up and hit the climax. Give us some things to kind of think about and prepare for as we go on. So that's what this is going to be. This is going to be kind of a little bit of a recap session, and then heading into the new information that we have and some things to consider as we read as we move into the second big chunk of this book. I've been reading the discussion post where you guys have been talking about the book and how you feel about it so far, and I'm so glad that most of you seem to be enjoying it and seem to be getting things out of it. It is probably one of my favorite books of the last decade. It's one of the rare times. So I read a lot of non-serious books that are kind of whatever, but they're really fun, and I really enjoy reading them, and they give me a great escape from life, right? Um, but I wouldn't say that they were necessarily good. They're just really fun, right? And then a lot of the time, really good books, really well written, really serious good books are not always the most like easy reads, right? What I really like about this book is that there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot going on. It is a legitimately great book, but it's also a good read. I also find it to be a really good read, and so I love it whenever I have something that I enjoy and I get to share it with my students and they don't hate it, right? Like, I'm not saying that you gotta love it, but I always love it whenever you guys at least don't hate stuff. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering why I keep on bending over or whatever, for some reason the camera or my web mic's microphones are not working right anymore, so I've got to record my voice with my headset microphone, but my video camera's camera still works, so I got to use that for the video so that way you can see all this. Hey, all this. But I got to use this to record my voice, and so I know it doesn't sound as good as it used to, but it is what it is. So let's get into Ocean at the End of the Lane a little bit here. I want to try to not rush through this, even though I just did it all. So I'm going to try to do it well. So let's talk about some major themes and ideas to pay attention to before we really go into it a whole lot further. So one, it is a frame story again. The frame narrative here is the older gentleman is back home has returned to where he grew up for a funeral. We don't know who the funeral's for. We don't know the narrator's name, but he's back home to attend a funeral. We assume that it's somebody close because he was asked to speak at it. And then after the funeral, he goes for a drive, and he finds himself on autopilot back to the house where he used to live, and he ends up at the Hemstock's house, and then he starts thinking about his past. And then we get the story of his past, right? And that's the story of his past. and then we jump back to him as an older man again at the end. And that's the frame narrative that is happening here. And you'll realize that frame narratives are kind of becoming a theme. We see them pop up a lot. They are a very common used literary device. It gives us a context for these stories, and context is always nice, right? It gives us a little bit more closure too, which we as an audience really like. Then there's this idea of the role of memory versus the role of fact, right? So, I had you guys consider that saying that children make horrible historians. And I think that that is very true whenever we talk about factual things. Kids are terrible at remembering factual events because they're not worried about facts. They're worried about themselves. And they don't have any context for the rest of the world. All they have is the relationship between them and what has happened. So if what has happened doesn't have anything to do with them, then they don't have any reason to care about it or like any context for it. So they don't. So what this novel, I think, argues, though, is that facts are not necessarily important whenever we talk about our childhoods. That what is important is what those events meant to us, how they shaped us, and the effects that they had on us. Not whether or not the things were actually factual or true, but how they have stayed with us. It doesn't matter the size of the fish that you caught whenever you were 4. It matters how you remember catching that fish. It matters how that moment exists in your mind. And so I think that in this novel especially, he's asking us to consider the fact that maybe what is important when we think about childhood and children is not so much the factual nature of events and whether something is real or is not real, but the impact that it has on children and how they perceive the world, right? We are all at the point now where we understand that Santa Claus is not real. That does not mean that Santa Claus does not have a real impact or that Santa Claus does not matter. While Santa Claus may not be factual, Santa Claus matters quite a lot to many children. And so I think that that is really one of the principal arguments that this novel is making. Then obviously the author talks a lot about the nature of the adult world versus the world of children, and the way that adults perceive things versus the way that children perceive things. And he even talks about, because he's telling us this story as he remembers it, right? So he even talks at times about how he saw it as a child, but how if he saw it now as an adult, he would see it very differently. And I think that is very, very interesting because he is reflecting on how even he himself has been changed by this world as he is reflecting on the differences between those things. And then obviously the reality versus imagination, and that gets into the whole way that you can read this novel. So you can take this novel at face value, and you can say that the magical is the magical, and the flapping creature is the flapping creature, and the worm is the worm, and all this stuff just is what the novel says that it is in the world of the novel. Or you can say that it is all symbolic and that it is all a metaphor for something that Letty and the narrator conquered together, some great evil or some great fear that they took on together, and that it was so traumatic that in his memory he is processing it as these fantastical, as these mystical things. But the reality of them was probably much more mundane. But his imagination as a child turned it into something else. And because what matters to children is how it affects them, not how it was, is what he now remembers. And I think both of those are a perfectly fine way to read the novel. I'll be honest, personally, I like to just accept the magic as the magic. I like to accept the myth as a myth. I think it's a lot more fun that way. But I'm sure that some people out there are out there trying to pull apart every single thing and talk about how it's a symbol for something else, right? And then it's about the way that trauma shapes the self and how the loss of innocence leads to all of us growing. All of us have that seminal moment in our lives where the world stops being simple and fun and magical and starts kind of being a bit more real, and starts being a bit more serious, and starts being a bit more dangerous. And the narrator has several of those moments in this novel, but I think all of us have a similar experience. That moment where maybe we realize that our parents were people too. That moment where maybe we realize that everything doesn't have a happy ending. Yeah, and so, or or something traumatic that like happened to us that like shaped who we are. And I think all of us have those moments, and they are probably non-desirable, but still important. We can have things that we wish didn't happen, but are still important, and maybe we wouldn't want to lose because they're so important to who we are now. I had some bad things happen to me while I was growing up that weren't great, um, and I'm not happy that they happened, but I wouldn't want to lose them now because they made me be who I am, and I don't know if I would want to risk not being who I am simply to not have to have had those experiences. So let's go through it a little bit here. We're going to try and go through this in chunks. I'm going to try and speed this up because I'm already 10 minutes deep and I'm not trying to keep you too long. So to start, I already talked about this. The the novel is really about friendship and family and the nature of like friendship and family and what those things mean, but then also the nature of like childhood, and so again, we start with this narrator. He's gone home to visit. He goes out for a drive. He finds like Hemstock House. He begins to remember, and we are instantly transported to his 7th birthday party where nobody comes, and he's given a kitten named Fluffy. And then he talks about how much he loves books, and he's kind of a loner. And then Fluffy is hit by a car, and this opal miner comes to stay with the family because we find out that the family used to be affluent. They used to have money, and now maybe not so affluent. Something has happened, and their money is dissipating. They are no longer doing very well, so they have to start renting rooms of their house out to visitors. And so this opal miner who is staying with them and is renting a room runs over his new birthday cat, and he brings him a replacement cat, right? But the replacement cat is not very good. The replacement cat is very mean and kind of vicious. So let's talk about some major themes that kind of shape this beginning here. So, one, when does this novel take place? What is the time period for it here? And this I think is really interesting because the narrator offers some hints and some descriptions, but depending on which perspective you look at, it could be anywhere from like the 19th century to like last week. I mean, it could really kind of span the ranges here, and so yes, like when is this novel taking place? And then what's the tone? Is this going to be a happy novel? Is this a scary novel? Is it a funny novel? How are we supposed to be feeling as the audience? What is the feeling that the author is trying to establish here? What does the opal miner represent? So the opal miner and his death is the hinge on which the whole story kind of folds around, right? Um, his death is what leads us to all the other conflicts, and so opals represent a very specific thing, and then b the opal miner himself represents a specific thing, the thing that leads to his death, right? And then what he brings in his death, right, are all kind of linked together. And so it's probably good to start thinking about how those things all fit together. Why is the birthday party so important, and what does it let us know about the narrator and the nature of the narrator? That's also a kind of important thing to think about, especially because language becomes important later on. And so, why is this narrator, who's so interested in books and words, like the perfect fit to be Letty's compatriot later on? And then, how does the narrator feel about his relationship to the past? So when he talks about going back home and talking to the people that he used to know and the kind of questions that they ask and how he's driving around, you get this feeling that he has a certain perspective about his past. And then I think it would be interesting to compare if his relationship to his past changes by the end of the story. I think that that's definitely something worth considering. So, chapter 2, things begin to get weird. So this is the chapter where the opal miner steals the father's car one night and drives it down to the end of the lane, and the narrator and his father go to recover the car, and they discover that the opal miner has killed himself in it. And so as the dad is dealing with the opal miner and the police, the narrator wanders off and he goes to the Hemstock's house. And he meets Letty and her mother and her grandmother, and we can talk all about the three goddess archetype and that's the mother, the crone, and oh my gosh, is the grandmother, mother, and crone. Hold on, three goddess. The triple goddess. The triple goddess. I'm assuming you can see this. Hold on, let me check. Yeah. So the triple goddess is an archetype. Yeah, the maiden, the mother, and the crone. Right. So the maiden is the of age person. She is you know, of a ripe age. The crone is an old woman. She's old, disagreeable, malicious, and then the mother, who is goodness and kindness, right? And so the maiden, the mother, and the crone, and they are supposed to represent the stage in the female life cycle. And this is something which is, I mean, here's the Wikipedia page. You can see it's got quite a bit written about it here. And so the hymn stocks follow this very, very closely. And if you look really here, so you'll notice the Sandman comic books. Wait, they're mentioned in this Wikipedia article about the Triple Goddess. Well, who wrote the Sandman comic books? Oh wait, they were written by Neil Gaiman. Look at that. What else did he write? Oh, that's right. Neil Gaiman also wrote The Ocean at the End of the Lane. So this is a motif that he has played around with quite a bit as well in the past. This triple goddess. So yeah. So anyways, he meets the Hemstocks, Letty, her mother, and her grandmother, and they feed him. They always feed him. And one of the things that you should consider is the relationship between the narrator and food, and then how that food feels for the narrator depending on where it's coming from. So the Hemstock's food is always perfect and satiating and wonderful, and then like his father feeds him burnt toast, right? Like the food is this indication of feelings. It is representative of the underlying relationships at play here. So after they feed him, they go around and they find a dead fish filled with money, which has all kinds of symbolic representation. Is also an allusion to a story from the Bible with Jesus. For those of you that have read the New Testament, taxes, which might be important. You should consider how all this stuff is tying together. And the money becomes very, very important in the future. Let's move on, though. I'm running long here already. Oh, my God. All right, I'm sorry. I'm going to go faster. All right, Chapter 3, things get even weirder, all right? Money starts showing up everywhere. The narrator wins a 25-pound giveaway that he doesn't even remember entering. All right, the neighbor finds a jar full of coins. One morning, the narrator wakes up and he's choking on a shilling piece, and he just pulls it out like it's no big deal. That doesn't freak him out. He doesn't tell anybody. I don't know. I would have been freaking out if I had woken up choking to death, but it is what it is. So he wakes up and he shows the shilling piece to Letty, and she becomes concerned because she knows that he's been having bad dreams, and that some other old lady has gone insane, and that there's money showing up all over the place and it's doing bad things, and they think that there's a spirit out there who wants to give people what they want. And this is where the book starts to become a little bit more metaphorical, right? Because what people want here is money. They don't want love. They're not looking for happiness. They're not looking for peace. They want money. They want that cold, hard cash. Right? But sometimes giving people exactly what they want, not good for them. So what do? Well, first, they got to eat breakfast because, again, food, right? And then they go out to find the nature of the spirit, and then we get into chapter 4. But first, let's talk about chapters 2 and 3 and things you should be paying attention to. So, what does the opal miner's death signify, especially whenever you find out why the opal miner died? All right, there's all kinds of implications there regarding greed and the role of money as a force in the adult world, and why it might not be such a good thing that everyone is getting this thing that they want, because what they want and what they need might not be the same thing. All right. And then I've always wondered, why isn't the narrator more affected by the miner's death? Like, this dude literally offs himself in the family car, and then like narrators just skip beep bopping along like it's no big deal, off to go play with some friends in the hedges. Seems a little sketch, but something to at least consider. Why? Is that just the nature of children? Or is it, again, because kids can't contextualize things that they don't have relationships to? Um, how much older than the narrator is Letty? The narrator says she could be 10 or 11 or 10 million. So, how much older is Letty? And then, what do you think about Letty? She's an interesting character to try and pin down. She seems to have different aspects of her personality depending on the situation that you find herself in, especially as the story goes on. And so, hopefully, your consideration of Letty evolves as the novel goes on. I already talked about the hemstocks and the triple goddess there a little bit, but it is definitely a motif and a symbol that if you're not already familiar with, you might want to go check out and familiarize yourself with. There's a lot of mythological motifs in this particular work and in Gaiman's work in general. He loves mythology. He actually wrote a book 2 years ago called Norse Mythology, where he translated and transcribes a bunch of Nordic myths from like the Thor and Loki mythologies into English, and does a really good job with it. My children love listening to it. What's the real difference in the Hemstock home? What makes, like, if you had to describe the difference between the narrator's home and the Hemstock's home, what is the real difference there? Right? And so I think that you should really, really think about that. And then, obviously, the importance of money as a symbol. All right, moving on. Chapter 4. Things get really, really weird. So, Letty and the narrator go out to find the spirit that's giving everyone what they want, giving everybody the money. And they use, so in chapter 4, language becomes very important here. And I think this is important because in some ways Gaiman has already admitted to us as well that he's writing about himself. So this is a writer writing about the role that language played in these early events of his childhood as well. So, when the creature and Letty finally meet, right? So Letty goes and they get that stick and they're following it around and she's got to find the objects in the field that point the way to the creature, and things get thinner and a bit weirder and they go further and further out, right? But then whenever she meets the creature, he says that they speak with a language that seems older than time, the language of shaping, a language that he seemed to remember and could swear that he understood in his dreams. And there's a lot of implications there, especially in regards to both people, but then also the role of children, right? And children as the shapers of world and the shapers of reality, and the role of imagination and things. This chapter focuses on the strange logic of the fantasy story, and how, the flapping creature, the creature in the wind, is old rotten cloth and cobwebs flapping around some sticks that also creates wormholes to other worlds and then like other dimensions. It is a creature older than time itself, and they have come to bind it, right? To basically keep it from doing anything else, but it throws a big old ball of cobwebs at the narrator, and the narrator goes out to catch it. And as soon as the narrator lets go of Letty's hand, he feels a pain in his foot, right? And then on the return trip home, he finds a kitten in the field, a beautiful kitten in the field, but he can't keep it. But pay attention to the kitten. Kitten becomes important. All right, so chapter 5, things get even weirder. A worm or a word. All right, in chapter 5, the narrator goes home with his hurt foot. Letty thinks that they've done a good job binding the creature. Everything is fine. And then this little boy goes home and he hasn't told anybody about the worm in his foot because he's not a little boy that tells people things, as we learned about with the coin. And realistically speaking, right, when you were a child, and because I know at this point so many of you are like, boy, this kid is stupid. He should just tell some people and the people could help him and then maybe things wouldn't get bad. But whenever you were a kid, you didn't tell people things either because you didn't want to get in trouble. And as a child, you can never really differentiate between what is going to be big trouble and what won't be big trouble. So you just typically don't tell adults about anything unless you feel like you absolutely have to. And so he doesn't tell the adults about the worm in his foot, just like he doesn't tell them about the coin in his throat because he doesn't want to get in trouble. Because what if that was somebody else's coin? Or what if they blame him for having the worm in his foot, right? So instead, he goes home and he tries to drown the worm, right? So he tries to drown the worm and he grabs the head and then he pulls on it and part of it snaps off in the narrator's foot and then he flushes the rest down on the toilet. But the role of water here is going to be important. And the fact that he tries to drown this worm is going to be an important thing in the next little bit of the story here, all right? Oh, and then also the narrator starts to wonder who he is. Who who is he? What makes him? Chapter 5 is this really short chapter, but it's really this important chapter because it's all about him coming to terms with who he is as a person and like what he's meant to be and how he functions. And these are the kind of questions that kids start to ask themselves at about this age, right? So things to consider here. How does Gaiman talk about the supernatural, the things that are fantastical, the things that are not realistic, and then how does he blend them into the real? How does he blend them into reality? And in some ways, right, this is the function of the Hemstock farm. The Hemstock farm itself is that blending point of the fictional and the real, right? But he also does this other ways as well. So how does he do it? Why is the description of the flapping creature important? Why is it also terrifying? All right, I found the description of the flapping creature to be very unsettling for me, and I've read this book 4 or 5 times now, and it still always freaks me out a little bit. What does the term "flea" tell us about the creature? All right, and then what can we infer about what's going to happen in the book based on the way that the Hemstocks refer to the flapping creature? How does the narrator describe removing the worm? Why is that an effective description? What's the role of language in these 2 chapters? Why is that important? What's the role of names in these chapters and why is that important? Right? And that ties directly into the language thing, but then also the like name things. And then how is this really all just about exploring the coming of age metaphor? How is this all really about explaining those moments of trauma that make big impacts on us as we get older? And because really you could make the argument that for the narrator, as terrifying as the flapping creature was, the worm was probably more terrifying, especially because that was something that he took on by himself. That was a problem that he had to solve on his own. In the field, he didn't do anything. He just stood there. But whenever it was the worm, it was just him and the worm and the tweezers, man. And then why the kitten? And why is the narrator questioning who he is? Why at this point in the novel is he having this kind of existential crisis? So these are all things that I would like you to consider and think about as you start to wade into the next part of this book through through chapters 6 through 11. Again, I'm going to be seeing you guys on Thursday or Friday, and we will talk about the novel some more. We will break it down. In the folder, you will have your questions for chapters 6 through 11 to answer. I'm doing those instead of the quizzes because I feel like they're a bit more fair, and I think that they support what I want the outcomes to be anyways. They're kind of Google-proof questions. You're not going to get a lot of good answers for them while Googling, which is what I wanted. You also can't like Cliff Notes the novel and answer many of them. And really, I don't know why you would Cliff Notes this novel anyways. It's such a short novel. But I think that they support better your reading and then understanding rather than what the Kindred quizzes did, which did a great job of assessing kind of whether or not you had read, but I felt like maybe they were a bit too much gotcha. So I'm doing the questions this time to kind of build in ways for you guys to be more successful. So do your questions, and I'll see you guys at the end of this week. Hope you have a great week. Enjoy your day off Wednesday for Veterans Day. Yeah, have a good one.